Welcome to this fact-based investigative documentary. Today, we're taking a really close look at a geographic bottleneck that is currently reshaping global power, international trade, and literally the money in your wallet.
Imagine a waterway only a few dozen kilometers wide suddenly becoming the most important place on Earth for the global economy. Every day, enormous amounts of energy pass through it. And when that flow is threatened, the consequences can reach far beyond the Middle East.
To truly grasp the sheer magnitude of this vulnerability, we're going to walk through it step by step. We'll start with the geographic and economic baseline, right? Then we'll trace the rapid escalation of a hypothetical 2026 crisis based on actual expert wargaming. After that, we'll unpack the projected global economic shockwave, explore a few analytical scenarios for the future, and finally, answer the big one. Can we actually replace this vital route?
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the most important waterway, because to understand a crisis, we first have to understand the baseline of what the world relies on during times of peace.
What's absolutely mind-blowing here is the microscopic scale of this waterway compared to the rest of the globe. At its absolute narrowest point, bordered by Iran to the north and Oman to the south, the Strait of Hormuz is just 39 kilometers wide. That's it. Yet this tiny sliver of water, with major players like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq sitting just inside the Gulf, is the absolute heartbeat of global energy transportation.
Historically speaking, this route has been the undisputed king of Persian Gulf trade for centuries, honestly, way before oil was even a thing. Today, based on established data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, this strait facilitates the transit of around 20 million barrels of oil every single day. Let that sink in. That is roughly 20% of the entire world's seaborne oil trade, all funneling through two highly congested unidirectional sea lanes that are each only 2 miles wide.
So you might be wondering, where does all that energy actually go? Well, it's heavily skewed toward Asia and Europe. A staggering 84% of the crude and condensate shipped through the strait is heading straight for Asian markets. China alone relies on this exact choke point for a full third of its oil. In Europe, they source between 12 to 14% of their liquefied natural gas from Qatar right through this passage. But hey, it's not just fuel. Up to 35% of the world's urea, which is absolutely crucial for agricultural fertilizer, originates right here. If this flow stops, the world's ability to drive, heat homes, and literally grow food is immediately compromised.
So let's move on to Section 2. How could these geographic vulnerabilities play out in a worst-case scenario? Let's look at the timeline of geopolitical escalation.
Because of a very real history of tensions, think back to the devastating tanker war in the 1980s or the more recent vessel seizures, military experts and financial analysts frequently wargame potential crises. Let's walk through a hypothetical 2026 crisis model. In this projection, a sudden U.S.-Israeli air war against Iran kicks off in late February. In retaliation, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps targets shipping. By late March, the projection assumes Iran declares the strait completely closed to any vessel linked to the U.S., Israel, or their allies. After a simulated ceasefire collapses in early April, the model projects the U.S. launching its own naval blockade of Iranian ports by April 13th. Boom, we're instantly in a model dual blockade scenario completely halting normal commercial shipping.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Behind all this military action is a massive, high-stakes battle over international law. You see, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, guarantees something called transit passage, meaning ships have a guaranteed right to continuous, uninterrupted travel. But Iran never actually ratified that 1982 treaty. Instead, they rely on an older 1958 convention. That one allows for innocent passage, which gives the coastal state the right to supervise, set conditions, or even suspend access entirely if they decide a vessel is a security threat.
This brings us to a crucial piece of expert legal analysis. Iran is perfectly positioned to weaponize this treaty gap by combining what lawyers call persistent objection with hard military enforcement, like seizing tankers or dropping sea mines. They can essentially attempt to rewrite the rules of global maritime trade, asserting absolute sovereignty over this vital waterway.
Which brings us to Section 3, the global economic shockwave. Because when the world's most critical energy artery goes dark, the fallout transitions instantly from geopolitics to everyday inflation.
In this modeled scenario, the very moment the strait is restricted, energy markets go into full panic mode, purely based on the fear of supply loss. Projections show Brent crude oil surging past $100 a barrel, potentially peaking at a staggering $126. To put that into perspective, this would mark the single largest disruption to the world energy supply since the 1970s energy crisis, instantly inflating the cost of moving pretty much any good around the planet.
And natural gas? Yeah, it wouldn't be spared either. In this projection, Asian liquefied natural gas prices jump by 42% in just a matter of weeks. That skyrockets the cost of generating electricity and heating homes literally overnight.
You see, this choke point is deeply intertwined with your daily life. It wouldn't just be oil traders feeling the pain. War games project that 20,000 mariners and 2,000 ships could be left totally stranded in the Persian Gulf. Polypropylene, which is a key chemical precursor for plastics used in everything from food packaging to medical devices, is modeled to jump 40% in price. Over in China, everyday citizens would see retail petrol spike by about 39%. Add to that the massive disruption of global fertilizer, and we are looking at severe, across-the-board inflation hitting the entire globe. Although, it is worth pointing out that in this scenario, alternative energy exporters outside the Gulf, like the US or Norway, would likely see massive economic windfalls as desperate nations try to outbid each other for whatever secure supply is left.
If you enjoy documentaries that explain the forces shaping money, power, and geopolitics, subscribe to Golden Fern. We investigate the stories behind the headlines and bring them together in one place.
Moving right along into Section 4, we have to look ahead. What if it stays disrupted? Now, it is super important to note that these are not definitive predictions, okay? They are expert analytical scenarios drawn from major financial and energy institutions.
So, analysts generally break the future down into three possibilities. Scenario 1 is a short disruption. Markets remain super nervous, but diplomatic efforts actually succeed and shipping gradually returns to normal. Scenario 2 is a prolonged disruption. Oil and gas supplies tighten significantly, shipping insurance and freight costs remain sky high, and sustained inflationary pressure starts causing global economic downturns. Then there's Scenario 3, a severe, long-term disruption. Major energy flows are permanently reduced, nations are forced to just burn through their emergency reserves, and the entire architecture of global energy trade undergoes a permanent, highly painful transformation.
Which leads us to our fifth and final section. If the strait is really this vulnerable, what exactly are our backup plans? Can we replace it? It is absolutely the critical question that every government and energy trader has to ask themselves right now. Can the world actually replace the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, the established data gives us a pretty sobering answer. As we covered, the strait historically handles about 20 million barrels a day. The main alternative route is Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, known as the Petroline, which runs to the Red Sea. But here's the catch. Even when it is completely maxed out, the Petroline can only handle about 7 million barrels a day. And honestly, 2 million of those are already spoken for, needed for Saudi Arabia's own domestic use. The math simply does not add up to cover the shortfall.
The reality on the ground is stark. Alternative pipelines are basically already operating at or near maximum capacity. Finding new maritime routes? That requires immense logistical detours that just are not feasible for the sheer volume of ships that would be trapped. And what about emergency stockpiles? Well, China has a massive strategic petroleum reserve of about 1 billion barrels, sure. But experts note that for an economy of that massive size, 1 billion barrels only provides a few months of cover. The hard truth, completely verified by energy analysts worldwide, is that entirely replacing the Strait of Hormuz is physically impossible in the short term.
The Strait of Hormuz may look like a narrow line on a map, but its importance reaches into almost every economy on Earth. The real question is not whether the strait matters. It is how much the world has prepared for the possibility that one day the flow through it could suddenly stop.
If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Golden Fern, like the video, and tell us in the comments which global story we should investigate next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.